Kenneth Regan and his longtime associate William Hornsey. Small-time criminal 38-year-old Peter Rees was also brought on board to help with the plan. Regan was plotting to seize control of Anil's business by any means necessary.
He had no legitimate buyer or no money to buy the company, so for him to do that, Anil effectively had to disappear.
Regan remained brazen throughout the investigation, feeding the police false information and fleeing the country after Anil's body was found.
This was the systematic annihilation of a multi-generational family. The amount of harm that these offenders have caused, it really is very significant.
Cold and calculated, Regan and Hornsey methodically wiped out members from 3 generations of the Chowan family, including 2 young children, for the sole purpose of getting rich quick. This makes them 2 of the world's most evil killers.
This was a very complicated case, made more so by the actions of Regan from the outset. He wove lies throughout the investigation, which is not unusual, but the way that he did so was very explicit, and he did a very good job.
In 1998, the extensive criminal enterprise Avery and Hornsey had built came crashing down.
The whole plot revolves around being arrested with 25 kilograms of heroin. He was in the boot of his Mercedes car when he was stopped by the police, along with hundreds of £1,000s of cash. He was looking at a 20-year sentence.
Desperate to escape a lengthy prison term, Captain Cash sought to strike a deal with the police. In June 1998, after whistleblowing on one of his closest associates, Avery awaited his fate.
When he came before the courts, instead of a 20-year sentence, he received 8 years. And in fact, on that, he served less than half because of his informant role.
So here we have a man who's only served 4 years in jail, goes to live with his dad in a little bungalow near Salisbury, and he wants to get back to the big time.
Past.
With his new identity, Regan started planning his rise to power.
Kenneth Regan, as he was now, found work as an HGV driver, moving the pallets and the fruit about at Seba.
Supergrass and convicted drug dealer 54-year-old Kenneth Regan started to work his way into Anil's trusted inner circle.
Regan somehow managed to get himself trusted by Anil Chauhan, possibly through the way that he portrayed himself and his contacts that he said he had.
Whilst at Seba, Regan reached out to his old associate, William Hornsey.
Hornsey remained a friend of Regan, even though Regan had passed his name on to the police. And sometimes criminal bonds are stronger than you would imagine. And he went to his friend Hornsey and said, "This is what I've got planned. Come on board." Seba Freight was perfectly situated for his purposes because he was so close to Heathrow. He knew that Chowan was interested in selling, so it was over a period of months, he worked out how he was going to take the company. He wasn't going to buy it, he was going to take it.
In February 2003, Regan put his plan into action and, with the help of Hornsey, started his takeover bid.
He told Anil that he had a buyer that was going to buy the company, so he went prepared to discuss the sale of his company, and that was the last time Anil was ever seen alive by anybody other than Regan, Hornsey and Rees.
On the 13th of February 2003, the day of this meeting, 46-year-old Anil Chowan vanished.
Regan arrives at Seba Freight, brandishing this power of attorney and saying, "This is my company, I've now taken over it. Chowan has legged it, he's disappeared, taken his family with him. Goodness knows where they've gone. I am now in charge."
Claiming he was now the legal owner, Regan and Hornsey convinced the employees at Seba that all was well.
The people at Seba Freight were actually instructed that Anil Chauhan had gifted the company to Kenneth Regan.
So they thought, oh, well, OK, you're in charge now. Away we go. So at this stage, no one had reported.
Howard Pickard was a detective sergeant brought in to help with the case.
We had information coming from Regan himself, who came forward saying, yes, he was going to take over the company, and he had various documents purportedly signed by Anil Chauhan saying that this was the case and everything was above board.
It didn't take long for the police to realise not all was well at Seba Freight.
So, of the 3 people that were involved in the takeover at Seba, and that was a main line of inquiry, you had Kenneth Regan, a lady called Belinda Bruin, and a third person who let's call Mike. We found out that Belinda Bruin and
The police began to make inquiries around the various parties running Seba Freight.
Kenneth Regan had been very clever in the way that he put a veil of lies around what had happened and how it happened. So he made it very much look like Anil Chauhan had run away from tax problems or others and had left the country and left the company in his hands.
Despite the police's intense interest in him, 54-year-old Kenneth Regan remained cool, calm and collected throughout the investigation.
During his interviews, he was extremely helpful, tried to tell the police as much information as he could, but what he was telling the police was false information that was purely to divert attention from him, and did so initially. His lies were very, very clever lies, and they were backed up by documentary evidence.
But it wouldn't be long before Regan and Hornsey's story started to unravel, all in the idyllic countryside town.
We obviously made inquiries to find out why they were there, what they were doing there. And during those inquiries, it transpired that they had purportedly dug a drainage ditch in the fields where Belinda Bruin kept her horses. Belinda Bruin had no knowledge of this. She said that it was a surprise present from Regan to her to dig a ditch and make the drainage better. And she had certainly not asked him to do it. So police were drawn to the farmyard in Tiverton.
The senior investigating officer approached me and said, we'd like to get a digger and dig the ditch. And I had no hesitation in saying, yeah, we must do this.
Shortly before the police were due to start digging, an urgent new lead came in.
Regan and Hornsey told police that they were having a meeting of Anil Chauhan in Newport. Over the Easter weekend, they were going to give him passports so he could leave the country.
The family's last movements.
My suspicion is that they took the family hostage to try and use as leverage. I don't know how the sequence of events, I don't know who was killed first and who was killed last. Certainly would have had to kill the whole family at some stage if they were going to get away with the fact that Anil had left the country and left the business to them. Because there's no way that Anil would have left the business to somebody else and leave Nancy with nothing.
Cold and merciless, 54-year-old Regan, along with his accomplices Hornsey and Rees, were prepared to go to extreme lengths for control of the multi-million-pound company Seba.
Whether or not they'd been murdered in front of Anil still would have been under pressure. I have no doubts that Regan would have joyfully said to him that his wife and children were in danger. No doubts at all. It was all part of this torture and this pressure that they put on Anil to sign over his business.
Whilst Regan...
Tiverton, exhuming the bodies of the Chauhan family. Regan's ruse meant police missed the discovery by a matter of days.
Regan, Hornsey and Rees hired a van and boat to effectively take the bodies out to sea. We were able to get CCTV footage of them hiring the vehicle and driving from Tiverton down to the south coast. And so we were able to follow them both on mobile phone traffic and by their movements on CCTV. Regan was arrested in Ghent in Belgium in August of 2003. Apparently in a very dishevelled state, no money, no way of looking after himself, basically, and then was extradited to the UK. And a month later, Hornsey gave himself up to police, obviously having had enough time on the run.
All 3 men were charged with murder. DS Howard Pickard was gathering all the evidence when he made a vital breakthrough with an unlikely piece of evidence.
And it was the centre of attention. A trial involving the murder of an entire family, including two of the smallest children you could imagine, was a big story. And the savagery and brutality which had gone into it, involving such hardened criminals, was the stuff that made headlines.
All three of the accused pled not guilty, weaving a web of lies to prove their innocence.
Once the jigsaw had been put together, the evidence was overwhelming against them. Even during the trial, Regan came up with an ambush defence that he said an Asian gang run by somebody called Nav had been dealing with Anil Chauhan. It was they who had killed him and they who forced him into disposing of the body.
Throughout the trial, Regan maintained that the letter found in Anil Chauhan's sock had been planted there by police.
I gave evidence at the end of it, and I think it's fair to say that the defence gave me a hard time because they were obviously suggesting the sock evidence was a conspiracy between Devon and Cornwall Police, the Dorset Police, the Met Police, the Forensic Science Service, the CPS, that we're all in it together, which, you know, I mean, it's complete rubbish.
As the trial continued, cracks started to appear between Regan, Hornsey and Rees.
Regan and Hornsey gave an air of, we've seen all this before, that it's the prosecutor got to prove this, we don't have to prove anything, we've been inside before, you're not telling us anything new. Whereas Rees, who's certainly seen the inside of a court on many occasions, but never of such gravity, was a frightened man.
He sort of ate his own words, really. I mean, they were just despicable and carried out this appalling act on 5 innocent people.
Career criminal Kenneth Regan was a skilled liar and ruthless killer. He, along with his accomplice William Hornsey, systematically planned the cold-blooded killing of the Chauhan family for the sole purpose of financial gain. Fearing the police were onto them, Regan, Hornsey and their associate Rees exhumed the bodies from their grave site in Tiverton and dumped them in the sea. The bodies of the 2 children have never been found. Regan and Hornsey showed no remorse for their crimes. This makes them forever 2 of the world's most evil